Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. I, Engineer Shad Muhammad, lecturer at Department of Civil Engineering, ComSats University, Islamabad, Sahiwal campus. Welcome you all to this another interesting lecture. And this will be our lecture number 15 of the subject Mechanics of Solids 2. Today we will be studying some elastic behavior of the material and how we are going to quantify those quantities and stress strain curve and regarding allowable limits, states and various other topics. Alright, elastic behavior of materials. To predict deformation and failure, we need a mathematical relationship between stress and strain. In previous lecture, we deeply studied how stresses are generated and how they are developed and how you are going to quantify stresses and how you are going to quantify strains. First, we studied quantification of stresses and strains. Then we studied how you are going to measure them, stresses and strains with the help of equipment. Strain gauges or extensometers or stresses with the help of load cells. And now we will be studying their behavior and their relationship. Here we consider the simplest relationship appropriate to materials that exhibit elastic behavior. So we will be studying elastic behavior of the materials. Inelastic behavior will not be studied at this level. First point, we usually design parts or structures to have only elastic deformations. So our structures are mostly designed for elastic deformations, and inelastic deformations are ignored. So when loads are removed, the body returns to its shape and size. So this is the basic definition of elastic deformation, that when load is removed, the body comes back to its original shape and size. So mostly structures and members are designed up till elastic deformation. However, in recent performance-based designs, they are also including inelastic behavior of the materials. A material is said to be defined elastically if it substantially recovers its initial shape and size when load is removed. So elasticity is defined on the removal of load, that how material will behave on the removal of load. If that material recovers or regains its original position or shape, then that material is called elastic material, and if that material does not regain its original shape, then that is inelastic material. Most materials respond elastically, at least when deformations, or more precisely the strains, are very small. If deformation is very small, material may behave elastically, or strains are very small. And we have differentiated in our previous lecture what is the difference between deformation and strain. Deformation have some axial value or some rotational value, theta, while strain do not have that type of value. They have just magnitude and without direction. For example, below 0.001 or 0.01 depending on the material. So if that is steel or concrete, then you can consider that they are elastic within this range, 1% of the stress strain curve strain. During elastic deformation, there is usually no permanent internal change in the material. So no permanent change in the material, because material regains its original shape, and there is no permanent change in the material. After load is removed, one usually cannot detect the load were ever applied. So when load is removed, you will not be able to detect that load were ever applied. Furthermore, in advanced engineering applications, we want materials to regain its shape when loads are applied and removed. So in engineering applications, we also want that when load is removed, so that member regain its original shape and position. For these reasons, parts needs to be repeatedly designed to deform elastically under the loads they regularly experience. Okay, that's essential. Second part states that elastic deformations are proportional to the load. Elastic deformations are proportional to the loads. It means that stress is directly proportional to strain. Stress is directly proportional to strain. In addition, the stress is found to increase in proportion to the strain for most materials that deform elastically, at least at small strains. This is termed as linear elastic behavior. If there is a proper relationship and stress is directly proportional to the strain, then that is linear elastic behavior. For most engineering materials, stress is approximately a linear function of strain. Starting from zero strain. For some biological materials or fabrics, initial elongation initially occurs with little increase in stress, although eventually the stress increase is proportional to a strain. So third point states that represent a material that undergoes linear elastic deformation mathematically with a linear stress strain equation. So if material is going linear elastic, then you should predict that behavior through proper stress strain relationship. Young modulus definition has stated that Young modulus or elastic modulus E captures the intrinsic stiffness of the material when it elongates elastically, and it is defined as the proportionality between normal stress and normal strain when the material is subjected to normal stress in one direction. So this is the definition of elastic modulus, that it is the slope of the curve when there is normal stress and normal deformation or normal strain. To make quantitative prediction of the deformation of parts, we need a mathematical equation that captures the stress-strain relationship for elastic deformation. The most commonly used equation idealizes the stress to be precisely proportional to the strain starting from zero strain. Okay. Young's modulus or elastic modulus E is defined as the proportionality between normal stress and strain when the material is linear elastic. So that is Young's modulus. E depends on the material. Since strain is unitless, E has the same unit as the stress, that is Pascal or PSI. Stress is directly proportional to strain, and stress is equal to constant of proportionality, that is Young's modulus, and E. Okay, these all whole relationship is material dependent. Stress is material dependent, strain is material dependent, and E is material dependent. Okay, if you plot stress versus strain and there is linear slope, then that is called Young's modulus. The stiffer the material, the greater is the E. This is important. The stiffer the material, the greater is the E, modulus of elasticity, or the greater the E, modulus of elasticity, the greater will be the stiffness of the member of material. Stiffness refers to the force necessary to achieve a given deformation. Stiffness force is the slope of force versus deformation, and stiffness of a part depends on its material and geometry. So stiffness mostly depends on material and geometry, both. Stiffness depends on material and geometry both, because stress and strains are defined to capture intensity of force and deformation in an element independent of its size. E quantifies the intrinsic stiffness of the material irrespective of its size. A material with a larger E is stiffer because the same strain requires larger stress. This is very important, that your modulus of elasticity has been deducted or calculated from stress and strain, and stress and strain are intrinsic material properties. So modulus of elasticity is also intrinsic material property. However, when you are calculating the stiffness force is equal to stiffness K times deformation. So if you are calculating the stiffness, then that is dependent on geometric, because deformation is material property and force is external property, geometry dependent property, and deformation is also geometry dependent property. So stiffness is not intrinsic material property, however E is material intrinsic property. Alright, so let me reiterate. Because the stress and strains are defined to capture the intensity of force and deformation in an element independent of its size, E quantifies the intrinsic stiffness of the material irrespective of its size. So E quantifies the stiffness of the material irrespective of size. A material with larger E is stiffer because same strain requires a larger stress. And stiffness, so how we are going to define the stiffness? Stiffness is the resistance to deformation. Stiffness is the resistance against deformation. Simple. Modulus of elasticity varies by factor of 10 raised to power 5. Even over commonly used materials, and it strongly affects a designer's choice of material. So modulus of elasticity strongly affects the designer choice of the material. E has been measured and tabulated for thousands of materials. So you can take E from already developed tables if you do not have experiment, if you cannot conduct experiment and you know the material and industrial specification, you can rely on those specifications. This table shows typical values for a few materials, and more information can be found in Appendix D. On the cover, back cover, notice the wide range over which the elastic stiffness can vary. Over commonly used materials such as steel and rubber, E is seen to be vary by the factor 10 raised to power 5. Elastic moduli E of representative materials. These are the materials: diamond, System International gigapascal, 1000 gigapascal, United States customary units 150 megapascal, steel 2000 gigapascal, wood 12, rubber you can see, and plastic. So steel you can see commonly used material, and modulus of elasticity is 200 gigapascals. 6 point states that material that are elongated by the tensile stress in one direction contract in transverse perpendicular direction. This is important. This states the relationship of Poisson effect, that if there is lateral elongation, then there will be transverse contraction. Alright. When tensile stress acts in one direction, most materials contract in the perpendicular or transverse direction. This contraction is evident in highly flexible materials such as rubber. So if you want to go into stretch rubber, so one length will extend and another dimension of the rubber will contract or squeeze. Likewise, with a compressive stress in one direction, most materials expand in the transverse direction. If you are going to compress the material, so there will be reduction in one dimension, one direction of the dimension, and there will be extension in the lateral dimension. It is important to note that we are considering uniaxial normal stress, which acts in one direction. There is no tensile or compressive stress acting in the horizontal direction or the lateral phase. But there is strain in the horizontal direction. So it states that this case is for uniaxial loading case, and load is applied on uniaxis and only in one axis, and other axis is free to move, and there is no restraints and no loading conditions applied. So in later lectures you will study that how you are going to quantify those three-dimensional loading cases, and how you are going to calculate this strain in different dimensions, directions and dimensions. Okay, normal strain in the transverse direction is similarly defined as change in transverse length divided by its initial length. So you did study that how you are going to quantify strains in uniaxial and uniaxial direction, and it states that if you are going to quantify strain in another direction, so definition of strain remains the same. Imagine measuring the change in length parallel to and perpendicular to the tensile axis with extensometers. So with the help of extensometers you are going to measure the longitudinal direction strain and lateral direction strain. Say the initial length parallel to the perpendicular to the tensile axis is RL and LT. This is L, length of the extensometer, and this is LT. Under tension, so tensile force has been applied, so length will increase L plus del T and LT plus del T. So del can be in minus or del can be in plus. So under tension the axial length L changes by del, lengthens, so del is greater than 0, and transverse length, this one, del will reduce. Change in length will be shortening, they will be shortening. So original length minus new length minus the original length, so you will get a minus figure, and so that will be less than 0. So LT minus change in length. From length and elongation we find axial strain and transverse strain. So axial strain is change in length, this one, plus original length divided by original length, and strain tangential is tangential or transverse change in length divided by original length transverse. So strain is greater than 0, then that is tensile. If strain is the transverse strain is less than 0, then that is compression. So here longitudinally they will extend, and laterally the element will compress. Alright, number 8 point. For a material that deforms elastically, the transverse strain is proportional to the axial strain. So if the material is deforming elastically, the transverse strain is proportional to the axial strain. So there will be a straight line curve, and transverse strain is directly proportional to the axial strain, and that is the case for elastic material. If that is not more elastic, then transverse strain is not directly proportional to the elastic axial strain. So Poisson ratio captures the contraction in one direction. Okay, Poisson ratio is not the slope, value of the slope. So this is the ratio of ET divided by E, or strain in Y divided by strain in X. Captures the contraction. Poisson ratio nu captures the contraction in one direction when the material is elongated in the perpendicular direction, and it is defined as the as the proportionality between magnitudes of transverse and longitudinal normal strain when the material is subjected to only normal stress in the longitudinal direction. So basic definition of Poisson ratio. If we monitor the changes in both lengths L and LT during a single tensile test, we can find that the transverse strain changes as the axial strain increases. So this test, if you are applying axial tension, so you can observe that due to axial tension there will be observed a change in length, however tensile length, and there will be change in dimension, other dimension, that will be compressive in nature. And while the material is elastic, the transverse strain is found to change essentially in proportion to the axial strain. So if the material is elastic, there will be equal deformation or change in other direction too. So Poisson ratio is defined as the proportionality between the transverse and axial strain magnitude when linear elastic material is subjected to uniaxial normal stress. So three things are important. Poisson ratio. First, the simplest ratio is for uniaxial case. Second point, material should be in elastic region, elastic state. So, and nu depends on the material. Since strain and strain T are unitless, V nu is must be unitless. And tensile strain is equal to minus nu into strain. The Poisson ratio varies with a narrow range and rarely affects design. So Poisson ratio do not vary a lot, so very rarely they affect the design. Very few equations are there which take into account the effect of Poisson effect. So it is not as much important as a modulus of elasticity. Though it is more difficult to measure nu, Poisson ratio has been tabulated for a number of materials. See Appendix D. Appendix D is also given, and there are a lot of materials whose Poisson ratios are given. Generally, nu has values within narrow range. Generally, V is in between 0 and 0.5. This table indicates typical values for nu for commonly used types of materials. Nu usually has a minor effect on the design and is not as routinely measured as E. For all materials, modulus of elasticity is measured. However, Poisson ratio is an optional thing and they are mostly not measured. So typical Poisson ratio nu for different types of materials: rubber is almost 0.50, polymer 0.40, metal 0.3, ceramic 0.1, concrete 0.1, and steel is also 0.3 or 0.27 to 0.29, like this one. So you should remember these Poisson ratio values. They are essential. So this problem has been solved. A rectangular specimen this much millimeter wide, this is the wide, and thickness is given 2 millimeter, carries a tensile load of this much. This is load. The axially oriented extensometer measures an elongation of this much over a gauge length of this much. This is the gauge length. Transversely oriented extensometer measures a contraction of this much millimeter. This is a change in length, and this is the change in length for this one, and this is the change in length for this one. Over the gauge length of 10 millimeter, and here gauge length is of 10 millimeter. So one thing which is essential is this, that in both directions there will be different gauge lengths. Not essential that there will be different, but there must be gauge lengths. And from the measured load, the extensometer reading the dimensions, determine the elastic modulus and the Poisson ratio, assuming the material is linear elastic. So modulus of elasticity you have to calculate by calculating first stress, then you have to calculate the strain, and then you have to calculate the modulus of elasticity. And how you are going to calculate Poisson ratio? First you have to calculate the strain in one direction and then strain in another direction, and then the ratio of strain in one direction and the strain in another direction will give you the Poisson ratio. So the bar is subjected to tensile stress in the vertical direction. The cross-sectional area over which the axial force acts is, this is the area. So tensile stress is equal to P divided by A. So this is Newton and this is meter square, so megapascal. And this the axial strain is related to Maillard elongation and the gauge length of the axially oriented extensometer given by this one. Strain is equal to change in length divided by original length. Transverse strain is related to Maillard elongation and the gauge length is transverse strain. So more stress is directly proportional to strain and E. So E you can calculate. This is 69.7 gigapascal. 69.7 gigapascal. Okay, they are not in between these, so this is some different material. So Poisson ratio is tangential strain to the axial strain, strain Y or strain X. So minus is due to contraction, so both are in minus, so minus, so you will get this much. This is the Poisson ratio, 0.33. So this is an end to problem 2.7. Alright, now let's solve another problem, that is problem number 2.8. It states that a 12 feet long steel wide flange I-beam, 12 feet long, 144 inches or 12 feet long, I-beam designated W18 multiplied by 197 weighs 97 pound per feet, so self weight. In addition to its own weight, the beam carries 40 kips load at the point shown from another member resting on it. So this one, the bearing pads that are 11 inches by 8 inches and this much thick are placed between the beam on the concrete beneath it. This one. Bearing pads serve to distribute the force more evenly. The bearing pads have an elastic modulus of 3000 psi. So almost equivalent to normal concrete, 3000 psi. Estimate the deflection of the beam at each pad, presuming each pad deforms uniformly. So each pad is deforming uniformly and you have to estimate the deflection. With the deflection computed in part A, estimate the angle at which the beam tilts. So very interesting example that self weight is given and external load is also given, and it is almost a and simply supported beam with the cantilever portion too. So let's draw a free body diagram. So solution states that the beam weighs 97 pounds per feet. So 1 feet weighs 97 pound. So you have to multiply that with total length. So what will be the total length of the total weight of the or total mass of the beam? That will be 1164 pounds. And if we draw a free body diagram of the whole beam to find the force from the pads, then the weight of the beam, because of uniformly distributed, acts at the center of the mass. If we assume the pads deform uniformly, then net force due to each pad acts through its center. So this one, they will be applied at its center, and this P1 is unknown and P2 is unknown. So you can take about moment about P1 and or moment about P2, whatever suits you. And he has taken moment about point A. So taking moment about point A, you can find P2, and take in moment about point B, you can find point P1. So this one you have solved, P2 is equal to this much and P1 is equal to this much. Each pad has an area of this much. This is the area, so you can very easily calculate the stresses. So stress has been calculated, and stress 1 and stress 2, and modulus of elasticity is calculated as strain is stress divided by this one. So strain you have calculated. Now you are going to calculate the deformation, how much that deformation is. So deformation you can calculate that strain is equal to change in length divided by original length. So strain you have calculated, multiply by thickness, so you will get the change in length this much and this much. The center of the pads are separated by so the beam tilts, this is the slope, and this will be radian. We could consider the assumption that each pad deforms uniformly and the compression varies over each pad is this much, and this is 7% of the average deflection of. So very easy problem. So these are other problems, you can solve it, you should be able to solve it. Few will be challenging, tough, and failure and allowable limits on stress. If the strain is increased sufficiently, the deformation is no longer elastic. So there is a limit to deformation and elasticity too. We usually design so that a material does not experience such high level of strains. So our design are our elements are designed in such a way that we do not allow extensions to cross some measurable values. Here we consider how to identify a tolerable level of stress or strain. First, the material subjected to high tensile stresses often exhibit a failure that takes one of two general forms. So either material will behave like ductile material or brittle material. Many materials can be sorted into one or two major categories, that is ductile and brittle. So material behavior can be categorized in ductile behavior or brittle behavior. These categories are ones that are appreciated by everyone, everyday experiences. Ductile materials undergo permanent deformation. Ductile materials undergo permanent deformation when the strain reaches some level but continues to remain intact up to relatively high strains, and the stress strain curve becomes non-linear when permanent deformation begins. So up to yield point, mostly ductile materials are elastic, and after yield point crosses, then materials behave they have permanent deformations and they behave inelastically. So everyday paper clip, and you can see stress strain curve of paper clip. Brittle materials do not undergo permanent deformation but breaks at very low tensile strain. This is the glass, and do not undergo permanent deformation and do not yield. At yield point they may fracture but break at very low tensile strain. The stress strain curve remains linear until failure occurs. Example is glass. Ductile and many brittle materials often capable to sustain large compressive strains before failure occurs. So Compression, they can very resist very good, very beautifully. Many materials undergo plastic deformation. Okay, the stress strain relationship can differ depending on whether the load increases or decreases, and the permanent deformation remain after the load is removed. Okay, so many materials do undergo plastic deformation and they are ductile in nature, and that depends if the material will remain in plastic state or will come back to its elastic state. Consider a thin metal wire, case 1, that is undeformed state 1. This one, state 1, undeformed state. The wire elongates when the subjected to low tensile stress 2. So there is loading condition and stress 2 condition. The stress is then removed, stress 3. So when stress is removed, the material has come back to its original position. Since stress was low, the wire deformed elastically, so the length in state 3 equals the initial length. So 1 is equal to 3. You can see case 1, lower maximum stress, initial length was this one, and after loading length increased, and after loading length became as similar to the original one. Consider a second thin metal wire, case 2, this one. Eventually subjected to higher stresses, stress magnitude has increased, and it was here in first case and now it is here in second case. The material went to plastic deformation. For low stresses, the second wire deforms elastically like the first wire. When the stress exceeds some critical stress level designated by stress wire, the stress increases less for the same increase in strain. So strain is increasing more and stress is increasing less. During unloading state 2 to state 3, the stress decreases in proportion to strain, eventually following the initial slope E, as in case of this one. For the initial loading case, as in case 2, the wire shrinks but does not come back to its initial length. The strain that remains is referred to as plastic or permanent strain. This is this area. This is permanent strain. Okay, this one, this area, this length and this length is permanent change in length. Alright, the third part states that design a part to keep the stresses below the level at which the material behaves unacceptable, either by permanent deformation or complete failure or collapse. So your designed limit should be below unacceptable levels. So before defining unacceptable level, he has defined yield stress is defined as uniaxial tensile stress at which ductile material begins to exhibit noticeable plastic deformation. So exhibition of plastic deformation is the point at which yields, that point justifies the yield stress. So this is the behavior of ductile material and brittle material. So ductile material undergoes plastic deformation while brittle material do not undergo plastic deformation. The design limit is based on yield stress, stress Y, at which the material noticeably begins to deform plastically. Since we do not want the loads to produce permanent deformation in the material, we usually design so that the stresses stay below yield stress. So mostly all those designs, current designs are pursuing this provision that your member capacity is up till yield strength, and up till yield strength we consider your members to be failed. Since the transition from elastic to plastic is often gradual, it is hard to pinpoint the stress marking the first deviation from the linearity, the proportional limit. Instead, yield stress is often defined as the stress at which unloading would produce a plastic or permanent strain of 0.002. So if your strain is 0.002, strain at 0.002, and you draw a straight line, and the point at which it intersects the curve is the yield point. So mostly it is done for those materials whose yield point is not directly indicated or cannot be calculated directly from the stress strain curve. Brittle materials. The design limit is based on the failure stress failure at which material fractures. We do not want the loads to produce complete failure of the material. Therefore, we usually design so that stress remain below stress fracture. So we use stress fracture for brittle materials and stress yield for ductile materials. Fracture stress varies more from one specimen to another of the same brittle material than the yield stress varies across the specimen or the same ductile material. This is important. Variation of brittle material, properties of brittle material variate a lot as compared to ductile material of same origin. Strength is general term that refers to the maximum load carrying capacity which can withstand without failure. A body's strength depends on its material and geometry. This is important. Strength depends on geometry and material. Because stress and strain pertains to elements, yield stress and fracture stress quantifies a material strength. So stress and strain are dependent on material, and they are at material level. So yield stress and fracture quantifies the material strength. They are material properties. To be safe, given uncertainties, design parts so that stresses are significantly below level that causes failure. So your to be safe, your members should be below the allowable limits. There are often uncertainties regarding properties, the geometry and the loading. So many times there are uncertainties regarding properties of the material or geometry or the loading conditions. So you have to consider some factor of safety against all these conditions. Because of its capacity to deform plastically without failure beyond yield strength, ductile material is relatively tolerant of material flaws and uncertainties. So why ductile materials are preferable? Because they do allow and they do tolerate material flaws and uncertainties. By comparison, a brittle material is relatively intolerant to the flaws and uncertainties. So this is the bad draw of brittle material. Still, in either case, to account for uncertainties rather than let the stresses reach levels just below the yield or failure stress, one builds a margin of safety. So for both ductile materials and brittle materials, we can decide a margin of safety. While there are more advanced design methods, two common methods are allowable stress method and safety factor method. Allowable stress method, and allowable stress is defined typically a fraction of 1/3 or 1.5 or 2/3 of the yield or failure stress for both ductile and brittle materials, and parts are designed so that maximum stress is not greater than this allowable stress. So they are designed according to this provision. Second method is safety factor method. A factor of safety n is agreed upon at 1.3 or 1.5 or 2, and parts are designed so that maximum stress is not greater than yield or failure stress divided by n. So if allowable stress or factor of safety are particular to a material and application, both allowable stress and factor of safety are particular to a material and application. They are arrived by by professional bodies that establish standards or by company policy after extensive design and testing experience. So mostly ACI, American Concrete Institute, develops such provisions, and building standard codes of Pakistan, they have included these type of provisions, and British standards, and Australian standards, and New Zealand standards, and Canadian standards, and Indian standards, and there are various standards which are followed, and there are committees who are governing this factor of safeties. Take advantage of the superior properties of brittle material when they are relevant, but be careful using them when tensile stresses are high. So brittle materials are often used because they have other attractive properties. For example, they may be lightweight, have superior wear and friction properties, or can withstand high temperatures. These are very interesting properties of the brittle material, that they are many times lightweight and superior wear and friction properties, and withstand high temperatures. Often they are subjected to only compressive stresses and less prone to failure. Engineers are also developing new design methods to enable brittle materials to serve in applications where with tensile stresses. Brittle materials are weak in tensile stresses, so you should be careful that you should not be using brittle materials in those areas where tensile stresses are quite high. Variety of stress strain response. Now we will look at different stress strain responses, and different materials including both man-made and natural display widely different stress strain responses. Here we point out some of this variety. Materials that appear to be minor variation within a single class, such as steels, can exhibit widely different stress strain relationships. So even with what appears to be a narrow class of the materials, that is in fact great variety. The science of engineering of materials such as steels has led to many technological advances that enables this variety. Types of steel differ in many ways, and in particular there is significant variation in yield strength and ductility, which is quantified as the strain at fracture. Depicted here are two steels. The scale of stress and strain are very different. The steel at the left has low strength and high ductility, 250 Pascal, and ductility is 0.40, and this is 1000 megapascal, and ductility is up to, strain is up to 0.005, quite less. Ductility is quite less, and strength is quite more. The scales, okay, the steel at the left has low strength and high ductility, while at the right has high strength and low ductility. The ductility and the strength often needs to be traded off one for the other. So you can see that strain is shown no unitless, and stress is shown in megapascals, and parallel axis stress, another unit, is shown in KSI. So 250 megapascal is its yield strength, and its strain is 0.40, and you can see 1000 is almost yield strength, and 0.05, too much less. Ductility is too less, and strength is too high as compared to this one. Other metals, for example aluminium, nickel, titanium, have also been extensively developed to produce alloys with different properties suitable for many applications. Many elastomers or rubber materials are capable of sustaining very large strain while still remaining plastic. Elastomers are able to withstand very large strains up to 2 or 3 times of their initial length. Often their stress strain response remains nearly linear even for large strains, although the elastic modulus is much less than metals. Metals are 10 to the power 5 times stiffer than elastomers. Elastomers include fluorocarbon, ethylene propylene, and silicone. You can see strain 1, 2, 3, not 0.03, but their strength is too low. Biological materials often exhibit a stress strain curve that differ markedly from engineering materials. So most biological materials have complex stress strain curves. For example, ligaments have an initial low stiffness response called toe-in region, and which corresponds to the uncrippling of fibrils. They then respond linearly until failure occurs at moderate strains. This response further varies with other factors such as aging and immobility, lack of exercise. So quite a different response as compared to metal and elastomers. Polymeric materials, plastics play an increasing role in design because of their many favorable properties and low cost at which they can be mass produced. Engineers and designers today can take advantage of many materials, including with increasing frequency polymers. The mechanical behavior of many types of polymers is roughly similar to that of ductile materials. So they behave similar to ductile materials. A linear elastic response is followed by plastic deformation and eventually failure. Extensive effort is devoted to develop polymers that have useful combination of properties. Certain general properties of polymers give them a design advantage. They are light, inexpensive to fabricate in large numbers, and often have low area wear and tear. And okay. Despite their low strength and stiffness, polymers can substitute for metal in many applications because their mass density is so much less than metal. The strain in polymers can gradually increase with time even if the stress is constant. So you can go through over it, and let's solve this problem. Example problem 2.1. Load is given and elongation is given, and stress from load you can calculate the stresses. How you are going to calculate the stress formula is load divided by area, and the area depends on your specimen cross section, and pi d square divided by 4, and you are going to calculate load. Each load value you have to put, and area is constant, so you will get stresses, and then elongation divided by original length, so you will get strain. And if you plot this stress versus strain in Excel, you are going to get this one and this one. Okay, this is your home assignment that you have to calculate. You have to solve this problem and calculate stress and strain, and then you have to draw the stress strain curve. How you are going to do it? Okay, then this is another problem 2.10. You have to go through it, and there is a factor of safety, and these are other problems which you have to go through, and you should be capable enough. Few are advanced level problems, but you should challenge your capacities. So in next lecture we will be studying shear strain and shear stresses. That's it for today.